Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Elyachar, the chief content producer and writer of jakestake.com, a pop culture entertainment news website. If you're watching this on video, please give us a thumbs up and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're listening to this on any of our audio platforms, please give us a 5-star rating and please also download this episode and more episodes and also leave a comment. I really appreciate it. I'm thrilled that today's guest, she is an author, writer, and freelance editor. Her memoir, Honeymoon at Sea, is expected to hit shelves on September 19th, 2023. So please help me welcome Jennifer Silva Redmond to the podcast.
Hi, Jacob. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here, Jennifer. Thank you so much for taking time on your schedule to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, it has been a busy week. I was actually recording in the recording studio this week here in Seattle, the audiobook of my memoir. So that was exciting and a bit stressful. You know all about how stressful that can be.
Oh, yes. Recording for audio takes a long time, and not to mention the editing process is even longer.
Yes, I'm lucky because I was with a sound studio that did all the editing for me. So that's a totally different thing. I could just walk away, exhausted, and then they would work for another 6 hours and send me the tapes the next day. So yay, kudos.
Absolutely, kudos. So let's get started and talk about your
Yeah.
origin story. So when did you get interested in writing and how did that passion evolve into desire to pursue a career in journalism?
Well, this book is about literally when that all happened. So at 28, I was living in New York City. I was pursuing a career as an actor, meaning I was waiting tables. So I was waiting tables by day, auditioning when I could. And then I went back to San Diego, met up with my former boyfriend who proposed, and we decided to get married. So Russell and I, 6 months after we got married, we took off for Mexico on a 26-foot sailboat, which was his sailboat, and became our home. So we stayed a year in Mexico, and I started writing because, of course, I couldn't do any acting or auditioning because I was in the middle of the ocean on a boat. So I started going back to one of my original loves, which was writing. And then, as you say, that led to journalism of a sort, in that I was writing articles about what we were doing, which got published in Cruising World and Sail Magazine and places like that. And then my sort of essays got published in other places. And that was really the beginning of the notes and sketches that became this book, Honeymoon at Sea.
And that's amazing. So why did you decide it was a time to write Honeymoon at Sea?
Well, I really started writing the book in 1997, so almost 10 years later. And I had written some stories and some essays, as I said, some of which had gotten published. And people kept saying, "That's such an amazing story. You know, you guys live on this little boat." And we kept living on the boat, even when we went back to San Diego and went back to 9 to 5 jobs. And so people kept saying, "That's such an interesting story." I go, yeah, I think so too. But I wasn't exactly sure how to tell it. And I think it also took me a number of years to realize what I wanted to say in the book, not just have it be a journal of what we did. Today we did this, tomorrow, I wanted it to have a point to it and to have a message. And so when I started writing it seriously, about 10 years ago, I started, putting together chapters and seeing how they would flow together. And then this publisher, just 2 years ago, I saw this, or a year and a half ago, I saw this publisher in Toronto that was having a contest and said, "Send us your nonfiction manuscripts." So I did. And lo and behold, she called me and said, "We want to publish your book." And then, of course, being an editor, that led to a lot more work and a lot more editing and excitement and fun and stress and all that good stuff. But that's a long answer to your short question. How did I decide to do that?
Well, congratulations, because this is like almost a 25-year endeavor, almost coming
Exactly.
true.
Exactly. Yes, it's the typical 10-year overnight success for actors. Yeah, now it's the 25-year overnight success for writers. And I think luckily I found out along the way, thanks to my husband who was willing to let me read things to him endlessly and get his opinion on things that I had written and read things aloud a lot. And he's an artist. One of his paintings is right there.
Oh, that's pretty
So
cool.
we were yes, so we were both pursuing our art from this little boat and traveling around as we did it. And we've kept traveling and we've kept living on a sailboat. And I'm coming to you live right now from our slightly larger sailboat, which is in a marina right now in Seattle, so that I could be
Oh,
here for the audio
wow.
recording. Yes. So this is Watchfire. Yeah, as you can see, barometer, which most people don't have a barometer on their wall. There's a depth sounder, but I won't turn it on because we're probably sitting in a foot of water and it would scare me.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it because it's just amazing that you are on this boat right now and like able to talk in Seattle. That's just absolutely amazing. In fact, I think you're the first person I ever interviewed on a boat.
On a boat. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, it really is the perfect time, and as you said, I know both of us had to change a lot of things, with 2020 and the shutdown, and Russell and I had actually planned to take a trip up the coast of California, we're starting again in San Diego, and we did, and it was very strange to be traveling with the whole world shut down. But we just kept going and eventually ended up with the boat up here in Washington, which we're loving because it's really gorgeous. And he's a Midwestern boy like you, so he loves to travel, but he loves, all kinds of different landscapes, as do I. So, and being an artist, he's loving the beauty of this area too. So here we are on our sailboat still. The honeymoon continues.
Hooray for that. And that's really good. So let's talk about some of the topics that this book is going to delve
Yes.
into. So
Yeah.
one of the topics that I was very fascinated by is healthy communication.
Oh, yes. Yes, and when you're living on a small boat, just like, people nowadays, a lot of people your age are doing van life or tiny living or tiny houses and all of that kind of thing, and all of them, I'm sure, quickly come to realize that all those little things that you might be able to go, "Okay, I don't wanna have a conversation about that. I'm gonna jump in my car and go off to the gym, or I'm gonna go, out for drinks with my girlfriend or boyfriends," or, things like that, you suddenly can't do. So all of those things have to be addressed. You can't keep things simmering, and you can't get resentful. You have to just go, "Okay, this thing you're doing, we have to talk about this." Or this, or for him to say, "Okay, this thing you're doing that irritates me," or for me to be, for to just bring stuff up and talk about it, and that was one of our first big conversations in our marriage was to say, "You gotta talk about stuff. Can't let it simmer. Can't let it, turn in from a resentment to a big problem." And of course, being on a boat, we were also forced to be in contact literally every minute of every day, from, squeezing past each other to get in and out of, the galley or over here, over there, stepping across each other out in the cockpit, tripping over things out on the deck. It just kind of is like a boat. A boat is like an apartment, only the tiniest apartment you ever lived in. I mean, two people living in a tiny studio kind of thing. So all of those things have to be brought up and talked through, and I learned that I can't walk out on the conversation when I get uncomfortable or bothered or pissed off. I have to sit there and, have a scene about, where I go out, like I'm storming out and I storm out and go like, "Where am I going?" If there's
Yeah.
nowhere to go, so I had to just come back in and go like, "Okay, let's talk." And of course, it's if there could be a simpler way to describe it than to just say you have to respect the other person, you have to listen to their opinion, and you have to say, "They're not they're not making this up. This is how they feel. So I have to be able to envision how this action or words or whatever of mine is coming across to them. And I have to be willing to accept that. We're not always going to change, but we can at least, make small changes, and say, okay, this bugs you, I'm going to try hard not to say or do that thing. But it really just boils down to good communication is really just meaning you got
Absolutely.
to talk about it.
Absolutely got to talk about it. And believe me, when you said studio, I was instantly transported back to my studio apartment in Manhattan, New York City.
Right.
And boy, I
Right.
love that place. I love memories, but like I cannot. After living 4 years, I decided I'm done. I need to
Yeah.
have a bedroom minimum.
Right. And if you were in there with another person who has their own life and their own pursuits and their own books and things, and it's like, why is this sitting here? You gotta, we're neither one of us is a Felix Unger or an Oscar Madison, if you know the Odd
Oh
Couple.
yeah, I double.
Neither one is. We're not obsessively neat or really sloppy, but that's a thing that really makes people crazy on boats. Like if you get somebody who really is a neat freak and another person who's a slob, that could literally break up a relationship in a house, much less on a boat. But we both are kind of like, we can be a little messy and then we both go, okay, time to clean up. So we're really lucky there. Tiny things, but that can be such huge things.
I
Yeah.
totally agree. In addition to healthy communication on the boat, you also have a huge learning curve about operating the boat.
Yes.
And every single job, you don't have at least
Yep.
5 to 6 attendants with you at all times. It's
Yep.
just you and your husband.
Yes, and I was really lucky because Russell had been sailing since he was, a teenager, so he really knew boats, but he hadn't been sailing this boat that long, I mean, a long time, but, 5 years, 6 years, or whatever, but I just knew nothing, and in a way, it was good because I didn't have any bad habits to unlearn, um, so he would just let me take the tiller and, he would I quote in the book that he said, "You're not flying an F-18. Nothing is gonna happen that fast. We're moving along at this very gentle pace, so just relax, stay calm." And he also said, which I didn't quote in the book, but he said, when you see people, and this will happen a lot, and I'm sure since you've been around the water in, in New York and you see people on boats, is the person that's screaming at the other person is the person who really doesn't know what they're talking about. They're scared, in other words. That's why they yell at the other person. So those Captain Bligh kind of people are the people you got to be aware of, you're scared of because they just literally don't know, or they wouldn't be screaming at the other person. And Russell was always really calm. And when I did things wrong, he would just say, okay, now you know not to do that again. And, the boat's not going to tip over, probably. It doesn't want to, it wants to stay upright, but, don't do that again. And that was really lucky for me. I mean, he's pretty laid back and doesn't, overreact. So that was a huge thing. But as you say, it was this huge learning curve at the same time that I had given up everything that was familiar to me. I was away from all my friends, all my big extended Mexican American family, with cousins and, I mean, we had this huge family. And I was away from all of that. And I was away from work and all the things, that make us who we are, my work, my friends, everything. So that was really interesting. And I think in a way it was really part of what made our relationship, no pun intended, um, work because we built this platform, this foundation with both of us away from all the things that distract people from each other. And we just had to be just us. We had to build that foundation of our relationship really strong. And that obviously has paid off because here we are at 34 years of marriage, still on a boat. So
Congratulations
thank
on that
you.
milestone.
Yeah, yeah. We're
I
happy.
gotta, that's great. I gotta say, the longest I've been away from my friends and family was when I studied abroad in London, England, with Syracuse University and CU Boulder from January 19th, 2010 to May 7th, 2010. So that's a little, but that was international water. So we're talking
Hmm.
about being on a boat for a whole year. So what has been
Right.
some of the times between like learning about like going between U.S. waters and Mexico international borders, because that's very much interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting because once again, it was another thing that isolated us from everything that we were, comfortable with, and that was our status quo, shall we say. So we were even in a country where when you walk ashore and go to a store, you're speaking Spanish or you're at least speaking Spanglish. A lot of people in Baja, of course, speak English, but it's different. You're coming across borders. You are going into each new, say, Cabo San Lucas, going into the port captain, checking in with all of your papers, making sure that everything you've got, is not causing any kind of problem with immigration, visas, this, that, the other thing, the boat, there's just a million little bureaucratic things. But yes, also being in a foreign country, we were just away from everything that we knew, but we were also somewhere that was so welcoming. It was so warm. I mean, the Mexican people are just, so warm and so giving, and we so many times had people, give us rides or help us out or, explain things to us, give us words, in Spanish that I needed often, and just be so warm and welcoming, and, that was a huge thing, but also, like you say, I was just constantly at sea, with so many things being new to me, "Oh, today I have to worry about this," and, meanwhile, all the little pieces of everyday life. Whereas the fresh water, we have to go to a place and, put the fresh water in the tanks and, the gasoline, everything takes a little more work. We had an ice box, which, I don't know how many generations you'd have to go back to somebody in your family that had an ice box. It was probably around 1900, but we had an ice box. You'd put a big chunk of ice in it. I mean, all the little things like that. And how do you say ice? How do you say, "Where's the ice house?" As you're saying that, w being in a foreign country made everything a little more challenging, but a lot more fun. I mean, people don't go to Mexico, because it's a terrible place, of course. Everybody loves vacationing in Mexico, and so in some ways, it was also the vacation, the beauty, the unspoiled nature, these white sand beaches, clear, clear turquoise water, snorkeling. Gosh, I could go on, but you get the idea. Lots of good to offset all of the new and challenging and even sometimes scary.
I gotta say, speaking of scary, the cost of living, because you don't know what the American dollar and then it's going to compare with the Mexican peso. That must have been the
Right?
cost of living between living on the boat versus living on land. Like I
Yes,
knew my rent of my,
yes,
I know my rent in my both in my studio apartment in New York
right,
and my one bedroom in my hometown of Overland Park, Kansas. But
right.
but by saying all of that, you have to. It must have been.
Yes.
Oh boy, you had a great time. It must have been challenging to cover the balance checkbook.
Yes, and we were basically living on we had set ourselves a budget. We had literally remember, this is 1989, so we had traveler's checks. Neither of us had a credit card. We had traveler's checks. We had money in the bank back in San Diego, but that didn't do you any good. You weren't gonna be getting, wire transfers, so in places that we were. So we were basically going around with our traveler's checks, "Can you break a $20 traveler's check?" In Spanish. Um, and yeah, it we weren't sure how much it was gonna cost us when we left. I mean, we looked at what other people had written about, but there weren't podcasts, there wasn't Google, there weren't all the forums that there are now. And I would say it probably costs us, oh my gosh, at least 5 times as much a month now to live, but, and we certainly don't live in an expensive manner, but we were probably I think at one point we figured out that all of our expenses, food, everything, what came down to that's my dog warning us about our neighbors at their boat next door. They just came to their boat next door on the dock here, and she's making sure that they're not coming to kill us. Um, but anyway, it was $500 a month. That's what it ended up being, and that was literally everything. So yeah, it was each month, can we stay in a marina? Is that going to be too expensive? Because even back in 1990, marinas are more expensive than staying in an anchorage, because in an anchorage you just drop the anchor and it's free. And when you go into town, then food costs and this costs and gas costs and propane and ice and da 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 da. So yeah, it was challenging. It was all new. It feels like I say that about in answer to every question of yours. It was all new.
Well, but here's the thing. I cannot imagine marina costs. I have never thought about adding a marina cost.
Right.
That had really escaped my mind. But now that you tell me that they have a marina cost, I'm like, oh boy, that too. That's just
Right.
complicates whole things.
Right.
It sounds like adding everything up.
Sure.
It's like keeping up with the car.
Yes, exactly. And you do have those day-to-day costs like a car does. I mean, the boat we have now has an engine, a diesel engine, inboard diesel engine, like big boats do. Our little boat had an outboard like you see on a skiff, or on a dinghy. So it was much more manageable. But it did, use gas, and then you need propane for your cook stove, and all those little pieces of the puzzle. But yeah, it was all new. It was all those things to learn about, and the challenges of day-to-day life. But as I've said, so many wonderful things to balance that out, and so many things, exploring and hiking and swimming and snorkeling and diving and sailing, learning to love sailing. I think you mentioned earlier that I was learning to sail, and what a learning curve that is. And the big difference with sailing is that once you learn to kind of understand what you're doing, then it's a joy, because it's really a sport as well as a lifestyle. It can be really a lot of fun. But yeah, the expense is different. I mean, nowadays you can spend $2,000 a month to live in a marina, in a fancy marina with all kinds of, where they have a health club and a pool and all the little fancy stuff, and in a bigger boat, it could be thousands every month, those big boats you see, the big yachts.
Oh yeah, those yes, and also here comes the thing. When people think of thoughts like for friends like, oh, you're living on a sailboat, that's amazing. I
Right.
bet they look like with the yacht. So what were some of your the factors that your friends noticed? Were they A, jealous, or B, did they all totally understand what your lifestyle, your and your husband's lifestyle was?
A lot of both. I mean, at first, we always joke about that. People say, "Oh, you live on a sailboat. That must be so much fun." And of course it is. It is fun. But they don't think about, putting jugs of water or diesel in your dinghy and rowing out to the boat, or motoring out to the boat, lifting it up, and, doing all the little things. I don't we don't have pressurized water, so you use a foot pump. That's okay. It's not hard. It's just different. I don't have, hot water, so I heat water when I need hot water. I mean, it's kind of like living in a cabin. So when people, if you've ever been in a cabin in the snow or something, oh, it's great. But after a week, you're like, okay, ready to get back home to where I have this, this, and this. A lot of times, like, I remember my sister-in-law said, "Oh my gosh," when she came inside, she said, "It's so small," and I think when people are hearing about our day-to-day life, it sounds so expansive because we're doing all these things, and then when they come below, they go, "Oh my gosh, this is small." And of course, the first boat that this period of my life, this first year of our marriage takes place on, was a 26-foot boat. It's very small. And now we look at those boats and you see them, a Columbia 26, all over the place. They're very common boats that people are sailing now. And we look at them and go, oh my gosh, how did we do that? But one, we were, madly in love. And two, it was Mexico. So it's warm a lot of the time. You're out on deck. You're sitting out in the outside part of the boat. So people still will say, "Oh, I want to come over and have wine on the poop deck," or whatever. We don't really have a poop deck, but people say that. Or just, cocktails, and yeah, it's nothing but cocktails and sitting, sure.
But
That's
also, I also gotta add, you also have to keep an eye on the elements, especially
Oh
during
my gosh,
hurricane
yes.
season.
Oh my gosh, yes. And that's one of the things that to this day is so different about my life versus somebody who lives on land, because you live in a house or a condo or apartment, or you don't have to care when it's windy. You don't have to think about when it's raining. Obviously, you might listen to the morning news. Oh, grab your umbrella or whatever. It's going to sprinkle today, or the streets are going to be wet. But you're not thinking, oh, what if my house comes loose and goes floating away? I mean, your boat, you have to anchor and your anchor has to stay stuck. Or if you're in a marina, you can be, blowing over to the side, and, you're inside trying to cook dinner or whatever. And it's all going like this back and forth. And, when it's blowing, obviously things can go wrong, and if you're out sailing, there's a lot of the book in the beginning where I got seasick, and I was really scared that I was gonna be seasick forever. I mean, if you've ever been seasick, it's just the worst feeling in the world, and so I was so afraid that I would never be able to get past it, and we'd be in these storms, and, yeah, there's definitely there isn't a you can't just push a button and say, "Okay, I'm done now." It's not like a car. You can't just pull over to the side of the road and go, "I'm done. I'm gonna walk away, call a Lyft car." It's just, yeah, you're in it.
And let's not
You're in it.
forget, God forbid something ever happened, you also have to like have the Coast Guard come rescue,
Yes.
and that's not cheap.
Yes. Yes. We have a VHF radio, and we also have a ham radio now, but we had only a VHF on the first boat, and so you're always aware of where the place that you would, who's with the closest place to you and who's gonna hear you if you call. You call "Mayday, mayday," just like in the movies, and, and hopefully somebody's close enough to you. I mean, we did know on this trip, much later than where the book basically ends. We knew of a boat that we'd traveled with that actually did end up going down in a storm, and they were rescued by a big international shipping boat tanker or something. But I mean, that could have been the end of their lives. I mean, they were just so far offshore, and it just, it's sort of one of those perfect storm things. One thing goes wrong, then another thing goes wrong, and pretty soon you are in a life-threatening situation. But we never were. We were not that far out of sight of land most of the time anyway, but even on the big ocean crossings, we always opted for the safe thing. We don't wanna have those stories to tell. They're not worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely not worth it, absolutely. We gotta talk about, like, the
Yeah.
challenge that you faced with the writing and the editing process for the book, and how did you overcome those obstacles? Because that story sounds amazing, but the writing and the editing processes must
Yes.
have been very difficult.
Very much so, and I'm an editor. I mean, that's my day job. So trying to edit your own work is very, very difficult, because you don't have the objectivity. You look at it and go, "Well, all of this is brilliant." You know, I can't cut anything. Or like I tend to do, you keep cutting and keep cutting and keep cutting, and then you've cut the story out of a chapter and you're like, "Wait, what was this about?" I just kept cutting into, you know, cut the core out of the apple, and I don't have anything left. So for me, that was the hard part. But as I said, 25 years later, from the 10 years later where I started writing, is where Rebecca Eckler of Rebooks in Toronto, found the book, read it, when I sent it in, read it, and she said, "I can't stop thinking about it." So I went, "Great." And she put me together with a wonderful editor, Deanna McFadden, and we just went around about things. She would say, like, "Tell me more in this subject. You're not explaining to me enough. You're assuming I know too much about the boat, or you're assuming I know too much about the geography, or you're assuming I know too much about Mexico, or acting, or New York," or, she would say, "Tell me more, tell me more." And then, of course, once I would tell more, it would be like, "Okay, now let's cut that down to where it fits with the rest of the chapter." So it was very challenging, but it was also having two people in your corner so much that kept saying, "This is a great memoir." I mean, their words. And it's really worthwhile, and we're gonna get it out there and people are gonna love it. We just want a little more of this and a little less of that, so that every day was just a small manageable chunk, if that makes sense, like a small task. Today, just tell me more about this subject that is not being made clear. And tomorrow we'll work in how that's going to fit into the chapter, or how that chapter is going to fit into the book. So it was made into these, chunks that could easily be attacked by me without me, losing my mind. And I had a good friend who said to me, as soon as I told her that I'd gotten a book contract and my book was coming out this year, and she said, "Oh, I'm so happy for you, but just know," because she'd had a book published, "it's going to be the hardest year of your life." And I'm like, "Really?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, it's really, really, really challenging." I was like, "Oh, wow." Because as much as I knew that from having been in publishing, I worked for a publishing company and I've been a freelance editor, I hadn't been the person in the driver's seat. I hadn't been the person where it's my book, my words, my edits, my changes, my marketing, and it really is just so very different. So, this would be the year that would drive Russell crazy more than any other. He's just had to hear it all from me, day in and day out. So he puts up with it beautifully, luckily. That helps
And
a lot.
that's incredible. That's incredible. So before we got start writing down in conversation.
Yes.
So I was
Yes.
looking at your blog. 10 years, 13 years is a very long
Yes.
time to blog. So kudos to you.
Yes.
Because
Thank you.
I started Jake's blogging with jakes.shake.com back in 2011. So I got to give you kudos. So you are
Thank you.
a pioneer
Thank
in
you.
the blogging sphere.
Yes. So jennyredbug.com, and that will also link to my new Substack, which is a newsletter, and that was going to talk all about the marketing of the book. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the cover because it's
Oh,
so
nice, everybody.
beautiful.
So
Oops,
guys, just to let you know,
I got too
if you're
far away.
listening to
It
guys,
doesn't.
if you're listening to this, go to our YouTube. Go back to YouTube to look at the cover because Jennifer
Sweet.
provided an incredible
Yes.
cover for us.
And it is available now for pre-order on all of your favorite online retailers, and also at Barnes & Noble and bookshop.org and Indigo, and anywhere you shop for books, it's available for pre-order now. And I just have to say, for people who are not book people, because really this has been a huge change in the 10 years that I have not been in publishing, that I've only been kind of tangentially in publishing, that pre-sales are everything. So if you think that there's the slightest chance that you're going to love this book, which of course you will, pre-order it, please. That'll really help us, me and my publisher, who's a small publisher, woman-owned business, yay. And it'll really help us to get a lot more exposure and get the book into more places. And as Jacob said, on jennyredbug.com, you can find, I have essays about writing, I have lots of book reviews, and like I said, also you can link to my Honeymoon at Sea website or Substack link. And so I'm trying to keep an equal strain on all parts, try and be out there on social media and all of that, and let people know about it, because like I say, pre-orders are a big deal for a struggling first-time authors and publishers, and because you're gonna love it.
Okay, awesome.
Yes.
So guys,
yes. And now you know that the honeymoon continues. So now you're hooked, right?
absolutely. So guys, if you missed an episode of the Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar podcast, visit our channels on Apple Podcasts. These are Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Podcast Addict, Spotify, and Spreaker. Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar, JACOB ELYACHAR. Now, you on social media, because I'm on social media too. Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and YouTube. It feels so weird saying X after Twitter for all those years. So it's Jacob Elyachar, JACOB ELYACHAR. And just as I mentioned, Jennifer, jakes-take.com. The longest started of all is turning 12 this year. So guys, if you want to find out what's been going on with America's Got Talent, if you missed Masked Singer season 9, or if you want to hear my takes on the latest music, head over to jakes-take.com. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me today. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to reading Honeymoon at Sea.
Oh, good. I really enjoyed it, Jacob. Thanks so much. And I'll be looking for you on social media now and tuning in next time.
Perfect. And guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, have a great one, everybody. Goodbye.